The sound woke me. Metal on concrete. Long. Wrong. I was at the window in 4 seconds. The tow truck was already there. My Lamborghini was in the air, front end lifted, chain looped around the subframe at the wrong angle. 2 HOA workers in reflective vests stood on the sidewalk like they'd done this before. Karen was on the pavement with a clipboard. Orange violation sticker already pressed flat against my windshield. She didn't look up when I came outside. I'd spent years alongside people with genuine authority over life and death. I knew the difference. "We have full authority to remove vehicles from HOA designated areas," she said. "Section 14, guest zone violation. You were warned 3 times. I told the operator to stop. He hesitated. I could see him reading the situation, the man in the doorway, the woman with the clipboard, $300,000 of Italian engineering hanging from a chain. For just a moment, it looked like common sense might interrupt. Karen cut it off. "File a complaint at the board meeting. That's 6 weeks from today." She finally looked up at me. "He's authorized to proceed." He put the truck in gear. That's when I heard it. The front splitter caught the curb lip as the truck pulled forward. One sharp crack, then a tearing final sound. Carbon fiber doesn't bend, it breaks. The wheel arch split open in a long, jagged line. The front end dropped 4 inches onto the asphalt, with a weight I felt through the soles of my feet. Karen didn't flinch. "You should have moved it when you received the notice," she said. "That's your insurance's concern now." 22 years working in environments where one wrong reaction cost more than the original problem that doesn't leave you. It sits in your chest like a second heartbeat, slowing everything down when everything else speeds up. I didn't raise my voice. I took out my phone and started filming. "That won't help you." Karen smoothed the orange sticker flat with 2 fingers, deliberate, almost ceremonial, like a finishing touch on a completed task. "We have full authority to enforce HOA rules on all property in this development." She said it the way people say things they've never once had to defend. Absolute. Final. I kept filming. I watched her in the viewfinder. She moved like someone already thinking about what came next. Not reactive procedural. That's a particular kind of dangerous. Not the explosive kind, but the settled routine kind. The kind that compounds over years because nothing has ever stopped it. She was wrong. Not close to wrong. Not wrong on a technicality. Wrong the way a person is wrong when they've confused the costume for the real thing, acted on it in front of a camera, and signed their name to it in ink. 3 houses down, Mrs. Alderton stood on her front porch in her housecoat, arms folded. She'd been there since before I came outside. I could tell by how still she was. She'd seen this before, not suspecting, knowing. The kind of tired that builds when you've watched the same scene play out too many times and stopped expecting it to change. She met my eyes for a moment, then looked away. The truck pulled left onto the main road. Silence came back to the street like nothing had happened. Just fluid pooling on the concrete and a scatter of carbon fiber along the curb edge. I turned off the camera and looked at what was left. The damage report came 4 days later from the authorized dealership on official letterhead. $287,000 in structural and bodywork damage, subframe stress fractures, front suspension destroyed, total loss. But I already knew that. The split in the wheel arch was 8 inches long. The suspension was sitting on the asphalt. You don't need a professional assessment to recognize deliberate destruction when you're standing in what's left of it. I stood on that curb and ran through what I'd just watched. Karen had walked onto my property, supervised the removal of my vehicle, watched it get dragged across the curb, and walked away with paperwork under her arm. Not in a panic, not making excuses, fully satisfied she had every right to do exactly what she'd just done. That kind of certainty was either profound arrogance or genuine ignorance of where her authority actually ended. Standing there that morning, I suspected it was both. Karen was already at her front door, heels on pavement, task completed, moving on. She had no idea she had just authorized the destruction of $300,000 of private property without a single legal basis to stand on. I stopped the recording. Then I looked at the signed work order she'd tucked back under her clipboard after waving the truck forward. Her name at the bottom, her signature in ink, the HOA seal pressed into the corner, kept like a record of a job well done. The orange sticker sat on my windshield, smooth, not a single air bubble. If Karen had known what I'd spent 22 years doing, the environments I'd worked in, the kind of people I'd watched walk free, because no one had taken the time to build the right record, she would not have signed that form. She had a clipboard, an HOA seal, 11 years of nobody pushing back hard enough. I had something she'd never seen coming. I knew exactly what to do next. The neighborhood didn't look like a place with a problem. 96 homes on quiet streets, mature oaks lining the sidewalks. The kind of suburb where people kept their lawns trimmed and their voices down. When I first drove through it, I remember thinking it was exactly what I'd been looking for. I bought the house outright, no mortgage, straight wire transfer, and moved in 14 months before the morning with the tow truck. I came here for quiet. After 22 years, quiet was the only thing I actually wanted. I didn't read the HOA documents as carefully as I should have. I've thought about that since. Not because it would have changed anything, the rules Karen was enforcing weren't in the documents the way she claimed, but because it would have told me earlier what kind of environment I was walking into. There's a version of me that would have read every page and mapped every provision against county code before unpacking a single box. That version would have been right. Karen Mitchell had been HOA president for 11 years. In 11 years, she had built something that looked like governance from the outside, but operated more like a toll booth. The rules existed, but the rules weren't really the point. The point was the mechanism. The certified letter, the fine schedule, the lien process, and Karen's 11-year expertise in deploying all three before a resident realized they could object. The violations she pursued were specific and exhausting by design. A man on the north side was fined $400 because his flag bracket extended 3 inches beyond the approved mounting position. A woman 2 streets over received a certified letter in November because her holiday lights were still hanging on January 3rd, 3 days past the December 31st cutoff buried in Section 22. One man spent 14 months in correspondence with Karen over the color of his exterior shutters. The approved palette ran to 24 shades of white and off-white. He'd painted them shade 7. Karen's violation notice cited shade 11 as required. He paid $4,500 rather than continue a fight over a paint chip. The pattern, once you saw it, was not random. Karen didn't send reminders. She sent one warning, let the window close, then moved directly to certified letters and fines. The warning wasn't designed to help anyone comply. It was designed to start the clock. The board had 3 members. All 3 had been recommended by Karen. All 3 had been seated during annual meetings where Karen controlled the agenda, the floor, and in at least 2 cases, the proxy count. In 11 years of recorded sessions, they had never once voted against her. Not once. I found a reference in the meeting minutes to a couple names redacted identified only as compliance dispute ongoing across 4 consecutive annual sessions. I tracked them down through a neighbor with a long enough memory. They'd accumulated $18,000 in fines over 4 years. Fines for landscaping for a storage unit visible from the street, for a vehicle parked overnight during what Karen had designated a restricted period under a provision nobody else had ever seen enforced. They'd moved 18 months ago. Their house sold at a loss. 2 families I knew about by name before this was over. There were more. I just hadn't found them yet. My own history with Karen before the tow had been brief. 8 weeks after I moved, an orange notice appeared on my door. A first warning for parking in what it called an unapproved vehicle zone. I moved the Lamborghini into my garage. I didn't call anyone. I didn't write back. I just moved it. I've thought about that decision since. Moving the car was the right call in the moment. I didn't have enough information yet to know what I was actually dealing with. But to Karen, I imagine it read very differently. Immediate and silent compliance probably looked exactly like what it would look like in her world: submission. And to someone who'd been operating without real pushback for 11 years, submission was just the starting position. The overflow guest zone, a paved strip adjacent to my unit, framed by painted lines on both ends, was where the Lamborghini had been sitting on and off for the past several months before the tow. The car was legally registered, fully insured. I'd never been told it couldn't be there long term, only that one notice 8 weeks prior. The HOA bylaws described the overflow zone in language that was genuinely ambiguous. It could be read 2 ways, depending on which county document you cross-referenced. I'd checked briefly and made a judgment call that it was fine. That judgment call turned out to be more correct than I'd even understood at the time. The clearest window I ever got into how Karen thought about her own authority came 3 months before the tow at a neighborhood BBQ. I was standing near the drink coolers. Karen was talking to Dale, a newer resident with some questions about what the HOA covered. I wasn't part of the conversation and didn't try to be, but I heard her. "I don't just enforce these rules," she said, lifting her cup with the easy confidence of someone who expects people to take notes when she speaks. I wrote most of them. Nobody questioned it. Nobody pushed back or asked a follow-up. It just sat there in the way certain things do when they've gone unchallenged long enough to start sounding like fact. I got a drink and walked away, but I remembered it. I hadn't told anyone in this neighborhood what I'd done before I moved in. That was deliberate. I wanted a house, a driveway, and the permanent end of other people's emergencies. I wanted to be no one in particular. Turns out being nobody has a limit. The damage report arrived on a Thursday, 4 days after the tow. It came on official dealership letterhead, 7 pages with photographs. The authorized technician had gone through every component systematically. Subframe stress fractures, front suspension, collapse, carbon fiber bodywork, loss across the entire forward section. His final line read, "Total loss. Replacement value $287,000. I read it twice, set it on the kitchen table. Then I went and made coffee because there wasn't much else to do with it at that moment, except document it properly and wait. The certified mail from Karen arrived the same afternoon. The HOA demand letter was 2 pages. Section 14 was cited in the opening paragraph, and again in the closing paragraph twice, as though repetition was a form of legal reinforcement. It itemized 3 charges: a tow authorization fee, a property management service fee, and a violation fine for repeated non-compliance. The total came to $2,400. Payment was due within 14 days. If I failed to pay within 14 days, Karen would initiate lien proceedings against my property. I read it twice, the same way I'd read the damage report. 2 things stood out immediately. The first was that Karen had signed the letter personally, not through the HOA's contracted management company, which is where these demands were supposed to originate under the governing documents. Her name, her signature, the HOA seal in the corner, but her hand on the pen. The second was that the letter made no mention of the damage, not one sentence. A vehicle had been lifted on a chain, dragged across a concrete curb, and left with a destroyed front end in my driveway, and the HOA's official written response was a $2,400 invoice, as if the destruction were simply part of the enforcement process, a line item. I set the letter beside the damage report. They made an interesting pair. The next morning I called an attorney, not a general practice firm, a real estate attorney, who specifically handled HOA disputes, recommended by someone I trusted. His name was Paul Merritt. I gave him the short version in about 4 minutes. He asked me to send him 3 things: the full HOA bylaws, the municipal code governing vehicle removal in this city, and the county property records for my address. Then he said, "Give me 48 hours. I sent him everything I had and went back to waiting. Karen called a community meeting 5 days later. Written notice to all 96 homeowners. Formal agenda posted in the mailroom. The stated subject was addressing ongoing legal threats and reaffirming HOA governance standards. 40 residents showed up. I drove past the community room on my way home and counted the cars. Then I went inside, changed my jacket, the one with the inside chest pocket deep enough for a phone, and went back. Karen was already at the front of the room when I arrived. 3 board members flanking her. A printed presentation on the screen behind her titled HOA, Governance and Community Standards. I found a seat in the back row, set my phone to record, and put it in my jacket pocket. She presented her version for about 20 minutes. The narrative was clean and internally consistent. A resident had repeatedly violated guest zone parking rules, received multiple warnings, refused to comply, and was now pursuing legal action against the community as a whole. She used the word threatening 4 times. She used the phrase, "our rules," 7 times. She did not show a photograph of the damage. She did not mention the $287,000 assessment. She did not mention that she had personally authorized the tow order and that the authorization bore her individual signature rather than the management company's. When she opened the floor, I raised my hand. The room went quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when people can feel something is about to shift. I stood up. "I have one question," I said. "Can you show me the specific provision in the city code, not the HOA bylaws? The actual municipal code that gives the HOA authority to order a tow from a privately deeded property?" Karen looked at me with the patient expression of someone explaining something obvious to someone slow. "We operate under our own governing documents," she said. "The city defers to HOA, Authority in Planned Communities. We've enforced this provision for years." I nodded. "Thank you." I sat back down. That was the whole exchange. 12 seconds. Karen moved on, and from where she was standing, I imagine it looked like I'd tried and retreated. The man who asked the question got a non-answer and sat down. The room probably read it the same way. What the room didn't know was that my phone had been running from the moment I walked through the door. She'd just said in front of 40 people that the HOA had authority over privately deeded property under the city's framework. Clearly, on record, in her own words. On the way out, the crowd moved through the double doors in clusters. I was near the back when I noticed Mrs. Alderton fall into step just to my left, close but not looking at me. She kept her voice low, just loud enough for me and no one else. "She did the same thing to my son," she said. "He paid it." She peeled off toward the parking lot before I could respond. I stood at my car for a moment in the dark. The meeting had lasted 45 minutes. Karen had said everything she was going to say. She'd said it clearly. She'd said it in front of witnesses, and she'd said it out loud in front of 40 people while my phone sat in my jacket pocket, recording the whole time. Paul Merritt called on a Wednesday morning, 48 hours after I'd sent him the documents. He didn't open with pleasantries. "I've got 2 findings," he said. "You're going to want to sit down." I was already sitting. The first finding, Section 14 of the HOA bylaws, applies exclusively to HOA-designated common areas. The overflow zone adjacent to my unit had been classified as a limited common element in the county records since the subdivision was first platted, which placed it squarely within my property deed. Not the HOA's, mine. Karen had no legal authority to order a tow from it. The second finding under state law, ordering the destruction of private property without lawful authority when damages exceed $100,000, constitutes criminal mischief, Class C felony. She hadn't overreached on a fine schedule. She hadn't stretched a rule past its reasonable limit. She had committed a felony, on camera, with her name signed to the authorization form in ink. I drove to the county records office that afternoon. I could have asked Paul to pull the plat map. I didn't. There are things you verify yourself when they matter enough, and this mattered enough. I pulled the subdivision file and spread the plat across the counter under the fluorescent lights. The overflow zone was right there, inside my recorded property boundary, with the line drawn exactly where it had always been drawn since the day this subdivision was built. Available to anyone willing to walk in and ask for it. Karen had been claiming authority over ground she had never legally owned. I photographed every page, had the clerk certify 2 copies, and drove home. Mrs. Alderton called that evening. She'd been quietly reaching out to neighbors she trusted, people who'd had their own run-ins with Karen and had stayed silent because they didn't know what else to do. She wanted to know if I'd be willing to meet with 2 of them. We sat at her kitchen table 2 days later. 4 of us. Coffee that nobody touched while it was still hot. The first was a woman named Sandra. She had paid $22,500 in fines over 4 years' violations for the angle of her mailbox post, a potted plant visible from the street, a holiday wreath left on her door 9 days into January. She'd kept every letter, every payment confirmation, every response Karen had sent in a box in her hall closet. She didn't know what they were worth. She just hadn't been able to throw them away. The second was a retired accountant named Mr. Patel, who had paid $11,500 over 2 years under similar circumstances. Between the 2 of them, $34,000 in fines over 6 years, most of it for violations that were either invented or applied selectively, depending on which resident Karen happened to be pursuing that quarter. But Mr. Patel had done something else besides pay his fines and keep records. He'd been tracking the HOA's finances for 2 years on his own time, because the numbers hadn't added up, and he was someone who noticed when numbers didn't add up. He opened his laptop and turned it toward me without introduction. $127,000 in fines collected since Karen became president. $89,000 received in the HOA operating account over the same period. The gap, $38,000. No documentation, no transfer records. No accounting entry explaining where it went. I looked at the spreadsheet for a moment. It was meticulous. The kind of work that takes patience and a particular refusal to let something go. "Have you shown this to anyone?" I asked. "I sent a summary to the County Financial Crimes Unit last week," he said. "I've been waiting to see if someone calls back." I looked at him. They will. He nodded slowly like he'd already known, but had needed someone to say it out loud. There was one more thing. Sandra reached into the folder she'd brought and set a small digital recorder on the table. She'd been at a board meeting the previous year, she said, when a neighbor had pushed back on a $200 fine for a fence stain Karen had deemed a violation. Sandra had been recording on her phone out of habit. She played 12 seconds. Karen's voice clean and unhurried. "Keep this up, and I will make sure you lose this house over a $200 fine. I have done it before." Nobody at the table said anything for a moment. I asked Sandra if I could borrow the recorder long enough to make a copy. She slid it across the table without a word. The tow company owner called Paul the following morning. His name was Gary Holt. He wasn't a bad man. He was a man who had trusted a signed authorization and a site map without checking either against the county plat. Karen had shown him a map that identified the overflow zone as HOA common property. He had no reason to doubt it. He'd done the job he'd been told to do. Now that he'd compared her map to the actual county records, he understood what the difference meant. He came into Paul's office 2 days later and signed a 6-paragraph statement. What Karen told him, what she showed him, what he now knew to be untrue, and what he was prepared to say under oath. I spent that Friday evening at my kitchen table with a manila folder, a label maker, and everything I had. Each document got a tab: tow authorization, demand letter, damage assessment, county plat, city ordinance, Paul's legal analysis, Gary Holt's statement, Sandra's payment records, the audio recording, Mr. Patel's spreadsheet. I was on the phone with Paul while I worked through it. "You're building the case," he said. I looked at the label I'd just pressed onto the plat map tab. Then I said, without really thinking about it, "After action documentation." Brief silence. "Military?" Paul asked. "Something like that," I said. He was smart enough not to push it further. As people were gathering their things to leave Mrs. Alderton's that afternoon, Sandra paused at the door and turned back. She looked at me the way people look when they're deciding how much to ask. "What did you do," she said carefully, "before you came here?" I picked up the folder from the table. "I solved problems," I said. She nodded slowly, like that answered it. It did. Karen found out I'd retained an attorney on a Tuesday. I don't know exactly how she found out. Neighborhoods like this have their own information systems, a word at a mailbox, someone who knew someone on the board. What I know is that by Wednesday morning, she knew. And the way Karen Mitchell responded to information she didn't like was always the same. She pushed harder. The lien appeared in the public record on Thursday. Paul called me the moment he saw it. I pulled up the county filing portal on my laptop and found it myself while he was still on the line. It was recorded under Karen's name, not the HOA, not the management company. Karen M. Mitchell, personally, against my property address, for the amount of $2,400, the same figure from the demand letter. I looked at it for a long moment. A lien requires a valid underlying debt, and there was none. Filing a baseless one in your personal name, rather than through the organization you represent, means every ounce of liability lands on you, not the HOA. "Karen, she signed it herself," Paul said. "I see that," I said. I wrote down the filing date, the document number, and the name exactly as it appeared on the record. Then I added the page to the folder. By Friday, the community campaign had started. I know this because 3 residents contacted me privately over the following week to tell me what they were hearing. Karen had been working the neighborhood, talking to residents at their driveways, at the mailboxes, at the community mailroom. Her message was consistent and had clearly been thought through. I was threatening to sue the entire community. My car had been illegally parked for months before the HOA finally acted. I was trying to intimidate the board into abandoning enforcement. If I succeeded, she told people none of the rules would mean anything. Property values, community standards, everything they'd built here would be at risk. It was effective in the way that a fast-moving story is always temporarily effective before the facts catch up to it. Some residents started avoiding me. I noticed it the slight adjustment in direction when someone spotted me, coming up the sidewalk, the way a conversation could end quickly when I arrived. I didn't blame them. Karen had been their HOA president for 11 years. I'd been their neighbor for 14 months. And the story she was telling had enough surface plausibility that without the documents sitting in my folder, it would have been difficult to refute quickly. The HOA board held an emergency session the following week. I wasn't notified in advance. I found out from Mrs. Alderton, who'd heard through the building grapevine that the meeting had happened, and obtained a copy of the minutes through her own channels. 3 board members, all Karen's appointments. The vote, 3-0. Resolution. The Lamborghini and any replacement vehicle owned by me were permanently prohibited from the overflow zone. Filed in the official meeting minutes, stamped, recorded. I read the resolution twice. Then I added the minutes to the folder, labeled them, and filed them behind the lien document. 2 more residents came forward that same week. The first was a man named Thomas, quieter than Sandra, more deliberate in how he chose his words. He'd had a different encounter with Karen 2 years earlier at a board meeting where he'd disputed a $175 fine for a fence post that Karen had classified as a structural modification. He'd brought his own phone that night. Karen's voice on his recording was lower than it had been on Sandra's, but the words were unmistakable. If you want to keep making this difficult, I can make your life here very difficult. I've done it before. Ask your neighbors. Different meeting. Different resident. Same construction. Same threat. Same last line. The second was a woman named Ellen, who worked in property management, and had noticed something Karen likely assumed nobody with the right background would ever bother to check. She forwarded me an email chain from 8 months earlier. Karen had waived fines for 2 residents on her street, close to $3,000 in total, for violations identical to ones she was actively pursuing against 3 other residents in different parts of the development. Same rule, same section, different outcome. In writing, with Karen's name on the responses. Selective enforcement. Documented in Karen's own emails. I passed both to Paul the same afternoon. He filed a motion to vacate the lien that Thursday, citing improper personal filing and the absence of a valid underlying debt. The court scheduled a hearing within 10 days. The cease and desist letter arrived on Friday. Karen's personal attorney had drafted it on firm letterhead, 2 pages formal language. The substance was this: I was to immediately stop contacting HOA board members and residents regarding the parking incident, the tow, or any related matter. The letter defined this conduct as harassment and intimidation of community officials. The conduct it was prohibiting specifically was talking to my neighbors. I read it standing at my kitchen counter. Then I called Paul. Keep every conversation dated and documented, he said. Be polite, be factual. Don't stop talking to your neighbors. I didn't. Every conversation I'd had since the meeting at Mrs. Alderton's was already dated and noted. Every resident who'd spoken to me privately had been offered the chance to provide a written account if they were willing. 3 had already done so. 2 more were considering it. The cease and desist letter went into the folder. It had its own tab now. Karen had a lien on my property. She had a board resolution banning my vehicle. She had a legal letter telling me to stop talking. She had a neighborhood that was at least partially keeping its distance. She had, in other words, done everything she knew how to do. She had no idea she'd been handing me evidence the entire time. Paul called that evening. His voice had a particular quality it hadn't had before. Careful, like he was making sure he had the words right before he said them. She filed the lien in her own name, he said, not the HOA's, hers, personally. I know, I said. You knew. Since Thursday, I said. I'd been counting on it. The formal meeting notice arrived by certified mail 2 days after Paul filed our motion to vacate the lien. Stated agenda: addressing ongoing legal threats and reaffirming HOA governance standards. All 96 homeowners notified in writing. The closing line read, "Attendance strongly encouraged." I read it at the front door. Set it on the counter next to the folder. Karen had decided to finish this in public, which meant I needed to be there. The community room held about 70 at capacity. I arrived 8 minutes before the hour. Karen was already at the front, arranging materials on the table with the efficient movements of someone who'd run this kind of meeting many times before. 3 board members sat behind the long table, evenly spaced. A projection screen behind them showed the HOA logo, a small oak tree in a circle, clean and neutral, the kind of image that conveys stable governance until you know what operates under it. Karen's personal attorney, charcoal suit legal pad, the composed expression of someone being paid to look untroubled, was seated at the far end of the table. I took a seat in the front row, set the manila folder on my lap, settled in. By 7 o'clock, 63 people had filled the room. I counted from where I was sitting. Mrs. Alderton was in the back left, arms folded. Mr. Patel had taken a chair 2 seats to my right. Sandra was near the middle, half-turned, as if she hadn't yet decided whether she was staying. Thomas was along the side wall. Ellen had come in just before the doors closed and found a spot near the back. Karen waited until the room was fully settled. Then she stood. She was good at this. 11 years of running rooms like this one will do that. She moved through her presentation with the unhurried confidence of someone who has already decided how the evening ends. The slides were clean and organized, a timeline of my parking violations going back to the first notice 8 weeks after I moved in, photographs of the car in the overflow zone across multiple dates, copies of the warning letters. If you walked in without any other information, it would have been persuasive. She showed a photograph of the Lamborghini parked in the zone. She did not show a photograph of the Lamborghini after the tow. She referenced the $2,400 demand letter. She did not mention the $287,000 damage assessment. She named me as the party pursuing litigation. She did not mention that she had personally signed the tow authorization, or that the lien had been filed under her individual name rather than the HOA's. If he succeeds, she told the room, none of our rules mean anything. The community standards that protect your property, your investment, everything you've built here, all of it, is at stake. She let that land. Several residents in the middle rows were watching her with the careful attention of people trying to calibrate whether the story they're hearing matches the situation they're actually in. I had been watching Karen for the better part of 20 minutes. The omissions were deliberate, that much was clear. She was showing what helped her and leaving out everything that didn't, which is a strategy right up until the moment the other side opens a folder. The manila folder was on my lap. I had not opened it. When Karen finished, her attorney stood. The statement ran about 4 minutes. The HOA had acted within its governing documents at every stage. The lien was properly filed and legally valid. If I proceeded with litigation, the HOA would pursue a countersuit, legal costs, reputational harm damages to HOA operations. He delivered all of it in the measured, practiced tone of someone reading from a script he'd been paid to make sound spontaneous. Then he sat down and recapped his pen. The room was quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when nobody quite knows what comes next. Karen surveyed it for a moment with the satisfaction of a job completed. Then she turned to me. Is there anything you'd like to say before we proceed to a vote on formal sanctions? I looked up from the folder. Yes, I said, but I'd like you to finish first. She paused. I have finished. I want to make sure, I said. I want to make sure you've said everything you want to say. Everything your attorney wants to say. Take whatever time you need. I looked at her evenly. Then I have some documents I think everyone in this room needs to see. Something shifted in the room. Not a sound, a quality of attention. The particular stillness that settles when people sense a direction is about to change. Karen glanced at her attorney. For the first time since I'd sat down, he looked at the folder on my lap. Is that a threat? Karen said. 63 people. Waiting. I looked at her for a moment. A threat, I said, is what you've been doing to this neighborhood for 11 years. I set the folder flat on the table in front of me. What I have in here is something different. I looked back at her. It's a correction. I opened the folder. 3 documents. I placed them on the table in front of me, face up in a row. Then I looked at Karen. The first one, I said, is the county plat map for this subdivision, filed with the county the day this development was recorded. I turned it so the room could see the boundary lines. That line, that's my unit. That shaded section is the overflow zone. It falls within my recorded deed. It is not HOA designated common area. It has never been HOA designated common area. I slid a copy across to Karen's attorney. He took it without looking at me. Karen was watching with the expression of someone waiting for a punchline they expect not to land. The second document is the municipal code. I set my finger on the relevant section. Under section 12-4BHO, as operating within this city have no towing authority over privately deeded property. None. Regardless of what their internal bylaws state. I looked up. Which means every vehicle removal authority Karen cited in her presentation tonight was authority she never legally held. The room shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically. The way weight shifts when a floor turns out to be less solid than expected. 3 people in the middle rows exchanged a look. One of the board members set his pen flat on the table. I placed my hand on the third document. This is the tow authorization Karen signed the morning my car was removed. Her name, her signature, the HOA seal. I let the room look at it for a moment. The damage to the vehicle documented in writing by the authorized dealership 4 days later came to $287,000. I let that number sit in the room. Under state law, ordering the destruction of private property without lawful authority when damages exceed $100,000 constitutes criminal mischief, Class C felony. 1 beat. I filed the criminal complaint with the county prosecutor's office on Tuesday of this week. Silence. Not the polite silence of a room waiting for the next speaker. The other kind. The kind that settles when something that cannot be unsaid has just been said, and everyone present understands at the same moment exactly what it means. Karen's attorney leaned close and said something against her ear. Karen didn't respond. She was looking at the document on the table. The organized certainty she'd carried through the entire evening. The expression of a person in complete control of her environment was gone. In its place was something I recognized. I'd seen it before in other rooms, on other people. The precise moment when a person understands that the situation they are in is not the situation they thought they were in. She didn't speak. I continued. The lien filed on my property is also invalid. Personal name, not the HOA's, which means the liability is hers alone, and there's no valid debt behind it. A beat. The second board member shifted in his seat. My attorney filed to vacate it 14 days ago. The court scheduled a hearing. Given what I've just shown you, the outcome isn't uncertain. The board member who'd set his pen down stood up. His chair scraped the floor, a hard sound in a very quiet room. I'm resigning from the board, he said, effective tonight. He said it to the room, not to Karen. She turned to look at him. He didn't meet her eyes. I unfolded Gary Holt's statement from the folder. The owner of the tow company has signed a 6-paragraph statement. Karen told him the overflow zone was HOA common property and showed him a site map to confirm it. That map does not match the county plat you just saw. I set it on the table. He is prepared to testify to this under oath. In the third row, a woman I hadn't spoken to before this evening put her hand over her mouth. She'd been paying fines for 3 years. I found that out afterward. The expression on her face wasn't grief exactly. It was the specific look of someone who suddenly understands how long they've been afraid of something that never had real teeth. One more item on the HOA's finances. I said it as a single sentence. A forensic review of HOA accounts has identified a $38,000 gap between fines collected and operating account deposits over the past 4 years. That file is currently with the County Financial Crimes Unit. Mr. Patel, 2 seats to my right, didn't move. He'd lived with that number for 2 years. He didn't need to react. He already knew what it meant. I reached into the folder a final time and set a small digital recorder on the table. Karen's attorney started to say something. I pressed play before he finished the first word. Her voice filled the room, clean audio, unhurried. The voice of a person who had never once imagined anyone would play it back in a room like this. Keep this up and I will make sure you lose this house over a $200 fine. I have done it before. I stopped the recording. Complete stillness. Then, from somewhere in the middle, rose a sound I hadn't anticipated. Someone crying, quietly. The way people cry when relief and anger arrive at exactly the same moment, and neither one wins outright. The woman in the third row. She was looking at her hands. Mrs. Alderton stood. She didn't say anything. She just stood the way people stand when they want a room to know where they are. Mr. Patel nodded once slowly to himself. Multiple conversations broke out simultaneously across the room, low and urgent, the kind that happen when people are rapidly recalibrating everything they thought they understood about something they'd accepted as fixed. Near the back right, I heard a man's voice, quiet but not quiet enough for a room that had gone this still. I know who that is, he said. His neighbor turned. Who? The man, a county sheriff's deputy 4 years into a transfer, lived 3 streets over. A fact I'd learned later, kept his voice low. I'll tell you later. He glanced toward the front of the room. But Karen just picked the wrong man. His neighbor looked at me. I was looking at the documents on the table. Karen's attorney closed his briefcase. The clasp locked with a small, clean click that carried across the room, the way small sounds do when a space has gone completely still. Karen was sitting. She had not moved since her attorney had whispered to her. She was looking at the plat map, the first document I'd placed on the table, the one the county had recorded before a single house in this development was built, with an expression I couldn't fully read from where I sat. Not anger, not defiance. The particular stillness of a person who has run the same play for 11 years and just watched it fail for the first time in front of everyone she'd built it on. I looked at the room. 63 people. Some of them had been afraid of this woman for years, paid her fines, moved because of her, shaped their lives around rules she'd written herself, and enforced selectively on a foundation that a single trip to the county records office could have dismantled at any point. I addressed the room, not Karen. I spent 22 years in environments where people with authority over others made decisions that had consequences they never faced. A pause. I came here because I wanted to be done with that. But I know how to document everything. I know how to let people make their mistakes in writing, and I know how to wait until the record is complete. I closed the folder. The record is complete. The things that happen after a fight like that don't happen all at once. They come in pieces over weeks and months, the way any large structure comes down, not in a single collapse, but in a sequence of smaller ones, each following logically from the last. Paul would call with an update. I'd make a note in the folder. The folder got thicker for a while before it got thinner. The county prosecutor's office called Paul 3 weeks after the community meeting. They had reviewed the criminal complaint and the supporting documentation, the plat map, the city ordinance, the tow authorization, Gary Holt's signed statement. They were accepting the case. A preliminary hearing was scheduled. Karen M. Mitchell, personally, for criminal mischief, Class C felony. Paul read me the case number over the phone. I wrote it down in the margin of the folder's cover page and didn't think about it again until later. The civil case didn't make it to trial. Karen's homeowner's insurance assigned counsel 2 weeks after the criminal filing. Within 30 days of that, settlement discussions opened. Paul handled all of it. I didn't attend a single negotiation session. There was nothing for me to negotiate. The documents had done the talking in that community room, and the documents were still doing it. The final settlement covered $287,000 in vehicle replacement costs, $40,000 in legal fees, and $25,000 in punitive damages. Every dollar documented, every number tied to a specific exhibit. The lien was vacated by court order 11 days after Paul filed the motion. The county recorded the reversal as a public document, the same public record where Karen had placed it. The notation read, "Filed without valid legal basis." Anyone who pulled my property file would find both entries, the lien and directly below it, the court's response. I thought that was appropriate. The HOA board was dissolved pending investigation into financial irregularities. Mr. Patel's $38,000 discrepancy had found its way to the right desk. The county audit ran for 4 months. 34 families received letters. The total amount returned, fines collected without valid basis, selectively enforced in some cases, documented as applied against residents. Karen had personal grievances with, came to $89,000 returned over 14 months. Sandra's payment history was reviewed. Her $22,500 came back in 3 installments. She called me when the third one cleared. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. Karen's house was listed for sale 11 weeks after the community meeting. The sign appeared on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, 3 residents had called Mrs. Alderton to confirm they'd seen it. The new board was elected at a special session 6 weeks after Karen resigned. Mr. Patel ran for treasurer on the straightforward platform that he knew where the money had gone and intended to make sure it didn't happen again. He won with 71 votes out of 89 cast. Mrs. Alderton was elected vice president. She'd been watching this neighborhood for 11 years from her front porch and had spent most of that time being afraid to do anything about what she saw. She told me later she was done being afraid of HOA paperwork. The new board's first official action was to publish the full HOA bylaws on a community website with plain language annotations explaining what each provision actually authorized and what it didn't. It was the kind of document that, if it had existed before, would have made Karen's entire operation impossible within the first year. It ran to 14 pages. Mr. Patel had drafted the annotations himself on his own time, because he said he wanted every resident to be able to read it without needing an attorney. The neighborhood changed after that. Not dramatically. It wasn't a different place with different houses and different people. It was the same suburb, the same quiet streets, the same mature oaks. But the quality of quiet was different. There's a particular kind of stillness that comes from apprehension, from keeping your head down, moving your car when you're told not, pushing back on a fine because the cost of fighting feels higher than the cost of paying. That stillness was gone. People talked to each other at the mailboxes again, not carefully, not with one eye on who might be watching. just talked. I noticed it in the small things first. A man 2 streets over put up a flagpole in early spring. He didn't ask permission. He didn't file a compliance request. He just put it up. It was a perfectly standard flagpole, well within any reasonable interpretation of community standards, and nobody said a word. I bought a replacement car 4 months after the settlement cleared. Different color, same model. I drove it home on a Thursday afternoon and parked it in the overflow zone. My overflow zone on my recorded property, within my deeded boundary, in the spot that had been mine since the day I signed the purchase agreement. I got out, stood next to it for a moment, and looked at the windshield. No orange sticker, no clipboard on the sidewalk, no one watching from across the street with a purpose, no sound of metal on concrete. Just a car parked legally on a quiet street in the afternoon sun. I stood there for a while. I hadn't come here for the fight. I want to be clear about that even now, even to myself. I came here because I'd spent 22 years in environments where everything moved fast and nothing was quiet, and I'd earned the right to be done with that. I'd bought this house, wired the money, and moved in 14 months before any of this started, with exactly one objective: to be left alone. Karen took that from me for a while. And then I took it back. Not with volume, not with anger, not with anything other than a trip to the county records office and a manila folder, and the patience to let someone make every mistake in writing before I said a single word in response. The tow receipt, the one Karen had signed that morning on my driveway, with the HOA seal in the corner, and her signature at the bottom, the one that had become Exhibit A in the civil case file, was sitting on my kitchen table when I got back inside. Paul had sent over the finalized settlement documents the day before. The check sat beside it, both of them on the same surface in the same light. I took a photograph, not to post anywhere, not to show anyone, just to have the way you keep certain things, not because you need them, but because they close a door that needed to be closed. Then I put both of them in a drawer. I went to make coffee. Outside the street was quiet.